On a dark moonlit night, the story begins with our protagonist, a cold and weary figure sitting across from an old man named Gui. Gui offers him a drink, speaking with a hint of nostalgia. A single nip, after all these decades, he says. The protagonist, with his tired white hair, gazes at the drink being poured. Gui continues, "We were much younger back then, with far fewer gray hairs." Our protagonist remains silent, his mind drifting back to a time nearly 40 years ago when he first met this man. A memory unfolds before his eyes. A younger version of the protagonist approaches Gui, asking for a favor, to send him back in time using the reversal of the heavenly cycles. Gui, surprised, reflects on the ritual. The reversal of the heavenly cycle, Gui muses. It had been a dream, a grand legacy of our clan that had been worked on for centuries, but no one could complete it until I came along. But in the end, I had to give up as well. He recalls how it had been impossible to gather the 5 components necessary to perform the ritual: the thunder bell of the Wind River sect, the censer of divine mysteries, a divine artifact from the celestial dragon clan, the essence of a 10,000-year-old carp, and the evil spirit of the demon cult. Despite the impossibility of collecting them all, the protagonist managed to bring every last one over the decades. But there was a long gap before he could retrieve the final piece: the evil spirit from the demon cult. Back in the present, Gui expresses disbelief. "I thought you were dead, lying forgotten somewhere. How did you manage this feat?" The protagonist responds, "When you listed those items, I cursed the ritual under my breath. I nearly cut you down then and there." Gui reflects on the change in his friend. The once vibrant man has now become middle-aged, his once radiant energy replaced by silver in his hair and weariness in his stance. "Nothing remains the same against the current of time," Gui mutters. Gui, never having gotten to ask this question, finally does. "Why do you wish to go back into the past?" Anger flares in the protagonist. He slams the drink down and shouts, "Vengeance!" Gui, shocked, inquires, "Is it impossible, even with your martial prowess?" The protagonist responds coldly, "Correct." Gui presses, "Then who do you hold the wind against?" The protagonist pauses, then whispers, "Mugiwha." The mention of Mugiwha leaves Gui stunned. Mugiwha, the one without equal, who stands at the top of the martial world, has slain all the great pillars of Murim, including the supreme overlord of the Dark Alliance and the heavenly demon. The protagonist's voice trembles with a resolve like iron. "Whatever it takes," he says. "I will kill that bastard no matter what. The heavenly demon was my father." Gui, shaken, listens as the protagonist continues. "But it's not out of grief for my father or the blood spilled over my older brother's death. On that day, Mugi spared no one, not even the servants, cooks, or innocent children. He even slaughtered the dogs and cats they kept." Gui, unable to fathom it, asks, "Why would he go to such lengths?" The protagonist replies with a cold finality, "Whether you believe it or not doesn't matter. The fact is, I can't stand this world as it is. I must go back and end him. But before I take his life, I'll ask him why. Why, with such great power, did he slaughter everyone?" Gui, at a loss for words, proposes, "If the ritual succeeds and you return to the past, can I ask a favor?" The protagonist, somewhat surprised, agrees. Gui's voice becomes serious, almost desperate. "Stop my marriage from happening," he says, a thunderclap rumbling outside, adding weight to his words. The protagonist suddenly bursts out laughing, but reassures him. "All right, that's a promise." They stand, preparing to head to the ritual site. The protagonist struggles to get up, and Gui rushes to help him. "Are you all right?" Gui asks, but the protagonist responds, "I'll manage an arm and an eye. They were minor sacrifices I made for the evil spirit." As they arrive at the site, Gui begins the ritual. Black mist surrounds them as he chants, and the air shimmers with mystical energy. A flash of light erupts, and a portal rips open, shattering reality itself. Gui exclaims, "I did it! Did you see, my friend? I pulled it off." But as Gui looks at the protagonist, he sees him struggling and realizes something is wrong. However, his greed takes over, and he sees an opportunity to go back in time. He faintly asks for forgiveness and walks toward the portal, but suddenly stops, unable to move as his body succumbs to the subdued paralysis points. The protagonist approaches him from behind and speaks, his tone colder than before. "How could you do this to me?" Gui tries to explain, but the protagonist grabs him by the neck, choking him. "You should have known better," the protagonist growls. Gwei, desperate, apologizes, saying, "I must have lost my mind. I'm truly sorry. I didn't mean to betray you." In a rare moment of mercy, the protagonist spares him. He explains, "My selfish nature allowed me to gather the impossible components. If it were anyone else, I would have struck them down in an instant. But you're an exception. You waited a lifetime for me, old friend. I won't forget that." But before Gwei can say more, time freezes, and everything turns black and white. Butterflies float around them as a voice speaks. "You have passed all the tests," it says. The protagonist, confused, asks, "Who are you?" The figure reveals himself as the one who can send him back. "You have defied the natural order. This ritual was never about the relics or artifacts, but the sacrifices you made to gather them. Forgiving Gwei was the final test. You have passed the trial by dedicating your life to this goal." The protagonist listens, his resolve hardening. The figure asks, "What do you wish to accomplish?" The protagonist responds, "I want to lay waste to those who deserve it and save the innocent. But more than that, I want to live my life fully. My entire existence has been lived for others. I've never had the chance to choose for myself." The figure smiles, intrigued. "I wonder what kind of life you'll lead," he muses. Then, as reality cracks around them, he disappears, faintly saying, "I shall look forward to your new life." Suddenly things go back to normal as the protagonist turns to Gwei, who pleads with him once more. "Please don't forget. Stop my marriage at all costs." The protagonist smirks. "I'll keep my promise." With that, he steps through the portal, bidding farewell to his old friend. The portal opens, and as a bright flash surrounds him, the protagonist opens his eyes. He's in a new place, surrounded by people cheering somberly. He realizes, "I made it back." His eyes fall on a figure in the distance, his father, the heavenly demon. He smiles, knowing that this is the beginning of a new chapter. But just as he prepares for the next step, someone shouts, "How long are you going to keep me waiting, young master? Let's get this fight started." The protagonist steels himself, ready for whatever comes next, knowing that today is the day of the demon gauntlet. The heavenly demon, once a feared and respected figure, had announced that the position of Cheonma would no longer be confined to his bloodline alone. This stirred up a great deal of excitement within the sect. With his words, he opened the path for anyone with the necessary strength to claim the title. To solidify this decision, he organized a martial arts tournament known as the Demon Gauntlet. The tournament was open to the upper echelons of the sect, and the victor would earn the right to challenge one of his two sons. The winner, regardless of who it was, would be granted a single wish. As the battle begins, Pyongho taunts the protagonist. It's not too late to back down. The protagonist, reflecting on the past, remembers how Pyongho had poisoned his food to keep him from using his abilities, ensuring his defeat. He recalls how his father had been cold and silent afterward, making him push recklessly, only to fall further away from the succession battle. Pyongho demands, "How long will you make me wait, young master?" The protagonist, unfazed, asks, "What was your name again?" Pyongho replies, "Pyongho Gu." But the protagonist already knows who he is, the fifth of the 7 disciples, one of the disciples of the 8 demon lords. Pyongho, getting irritated, threatens, "You're provoking me, huh?" The protagonist, ignoring him, and senses that his father, the heavenly demon, had already known about the poison, and had simply wanted to see how he would react. The protagonist, drawing from his future knowledge, knows he could defeat Pyongho in a single blow, but revealing his true strength would be unwise at this point. Suddenly, the protagonist boldly declares that he will fight without using any chi. The crowd gasps, murmuring among themselves, while his opponent, too, agrees to fight without his own chi. The air is thick with tension, and whispers begin to spread that the fight will be dull without the use of their full powers. Pyongho grows more irritated, warning the protagonist that his blade has a mind of its own, despite the lack of chi. The protagonist, in his youthful body, can feel the strange energy coursing through him, wondering if he can move as he wishes. Pyongho lunges at him, and, with a swift sidestep, the protagonist dodges easily. His body responds better than expected, and a feeling of nostalgia floods him. This is the body of his youth, the agility and speed he once had, a far cry from the limitations he had grown accustomed to in the future. The battle rages on, with the protagonist dodging and countering every strike with impressive precision. He lands an elbow to Pyongho's chest, followed by a hook to the nose that knocks him out. The crowd watches in stunned silence as the protagonist delivers a final series of punches, sending Pyongho sprawling across the arena, blood pouring from his mouth. With one final act of mercy, the protagonist grabs Pyongho's arm, asking, "Was it with this hand that you handed over the vial?" Pyongho is shocked as the protagonist swiftly breaks his arm with a single motion. His opponent screams in pain as the crowd erupts in shock. The protagonist, walking away from the wreckage, reflects on how costly this journey has been, how much he has sacrificed to come this far. His father, the heavenly demon, raises his hand to acknowledge the victory, announcing that the winner will receive a wish. The protagonist, with careful thought, declares, "I wish to go hunting with you, father." The heavenly demon, a man of few words, simply nods and responds, "Be ready to leave at first light." As he leaves, the protagonist feels a strange sense of calm at this simple request, realizing that this is what he truly wanted. His opponent, still being carried away, mocks him for wasting a wish on something so trivial. The protagonist, unfazed, turns to him with a smirk. "Who are you again?" he says, his words echoing as he walks away, leaving behind the bitter rivalries and struggles of his past. Later, in his room, the protagonist looks into the mirror, still incredulous at how youthful he feels. His thoughts wander to Mugi, the man who had caused so much pain. He wonders what Mugi is doing at this moment, knowing that finding him will be no easy task. Mugi had appeared out of nowhere, wreaking havoc across the Dark Alliance and the demon cult, then vanishing without a trace. The protagonist knows that to defeat Mugi, he must become stronger, but the search for him is a daunting one. His best bet is to grow in power, to surpass Mugi, and only then can he have his revenge. Suddenly, a voice interrupts his thoughts. "Young master, you were amazing today," Anne, his bodyguard, says as she enters the room. The protagonist turns to her, remembering how, in the past, he had been oblivious to her true abilities. Anne, with her powerful stonehide shell technique, a technique passed to her in secret, temporarily turns her skin as hard as stone. Unfortunately, gigantification is one of the side effects. She had saved his life by blocking Mugi's deadly strike, sacrificing herself to ensure his survival. At the time, he hadn't fully understood her sacrifice, but now he sees her in a new light. She had risked everything for him, and he had taken it all for granted. As An speaks to him, the protagonist reflects on how much he had underestimated her. He had failed to see the depth of her strength, just as he had failed to appreciate so much of what was around him. But now, he understands. He regrets not recognizing her worth before. As the realization sinks in, he silently vows to never make the same mistake again. An Li had long been hailed as the next beauty of the heavens. Her slender figure and grace were the subjects of much praise, and it seemed as if she would rise to the top, capturing the admiration of all who beheld her. But one day that same girl appeared before the protagonist, unrecognizable as a portly woman, her beauty lost to the weight she had gained. The protagonist reflects bitterly on the fact that he never noticed the toll it took on her. He failed to see the tears she shed, her once beautiful eyes now swollen. Why hadn't he comforted her during such a painful transformation? Perhaps, in his ignorance, he had begun treating her coldly, not understanding the emotional and physical strain she had endured. He makes a silent promise to himself, vowing to lift the adverse effects of the Stonehite technique that had caused her so much pain. As An interrupts his thoughts, asking if he is all right, the protagonist replies that he's fine, better than fine, in fact. However, An, who has been by his side as his bodyguard for so long, notices something is off. He realizes that she must have sensed the change in him. Determined to show her something even stranger, the protagonist leads her toward the kitchen, his mind already working. Upon arriving at the kitchen, he confronts one of the staff members. "Why did you do it?" he demands. The elder staff member looks at him with confusion. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he replies. But the protagonist's piercing gaze doesn't waver. He accuses the staff member of poisoning his food with chi dispersion, and the staff member, suddenly panicked, denies it vehemently. The protagonist, recalling his suspicions, pieces together the truth. This man, deeply in debt from his gambling addiction, had taken a bribe to poison his food. The protagonist's sharp mind easily connects the dots. With a swift motion, the protagonist slashes the staff member's head off, the blood spilling across the floor. A cook tampering with the food? You were beyond saving, he mutters coldly. The remaining staff members, shocked by the gruesome display, kneel and beg for mercy, but the protagonist is unmoved. This day's fault does not lie with you, he declares, shifting his focus to the elder cook. Cookmaster Lim, the evil was done by the poisoner. The elder cook, trembling, tries to take the blame but is quickly corrected. Is everything that goes wrong in our sect my father's fault? The protagonist asks. The cook, realizing his error, admits that it is not. The protagonist, though cold, spares the rest, choosing to walk away. As the protagonist leaves, he casually mentions that he wants a bowl of chicken silk noodles for dinner, a dish he hasn't had in ages, and, following him, points out that he had just asked for noodles a couple of days ago. The protagonist gives a faint smile, recalling the decades that have passed since he last truly enjoyed such a simple meal. The next morning, at dawn, the protagonist and his father, the heavenly demon, prepare for their hunting trip. The father, looking at his son with a massive bag, comments that he plans to never return. The protagonist, however, replies that they might end up staying longer than expected. His father, with a knowing look, warns him not to get his hopes up. As they walk into the forest, his father comments on how much he's improved. The protagonist reflects on the skills from his past life, realizing that it might be better to be upfront rather than try to fool him. I've been hiding my true strength for a while, the protagonist admits. His father, unfazed, replies, I figured as much. The father then asks, how far have you ascended in the Sword of the Skyward Path? The protagonist reflects on the technique. The Skyward Path, a legendary martial art passed down through the heavenly demon's bloodline. Revered as one of the most powerful techniques, it is said to rival the greatest martial arts of the demon world, known only to a select few. The protagonist responds confidently, I've reached mastery. Suddenly, an attack comes at him, and he barely dodges in time, realizing how close he came to death. His father remarks, it seems you weren't lying. The protagonist responds, if I hadn't dodged that in time. His father replies, the attack was hardly a threat to one who has mastered the sword. Then, with a rare hint of approval, he adds, achieving mastery at your age is commendable. The protagonist, surprised, quietly thanks his father as they continue walking. After a while, the protagonist asks, who taught you to hunt? His father answers, my elder brother. The protagonist, surprised, says, I didn't know I had an uncle. His father replies, he's long gone. I claimed his life when we were your age. The protagonist responds, I'm glad you did, shocking his father, because if you hadn't, I wouldn't be here today. His father doesn't reply, and the protagonist reflects on how, despite his father's coldness, he's not immune to the pain of fighting his own kin. The ones who seem the toughest often carry the deepest scars, he thinks. Then his father speaks again. At that time, I saw no other way. The protagonist responds, things might be no different with me, father. You should have given me a brother, at least half worth the trouble of considering. Wouldn't you agree? You know how vile and ruthless he is. His father looks at him and replies, how easily you throw shade at someone who's not even here, Magook. The scene shifts as the protagonist and his father climb through the rugged, stone mountain terrain, the early morning mist still clinging to the rocks around them. As they near the top of the mountain, the protagonist's thoughts drift. He realizes that, in his past life, he never married, never had children. He wonders what it truly means to have a father, or to be a son. What exactly am I to you, father? His eyes shift to his father, deep in thought as they approach the edge of a cliff. The protagonist breaks his reverie, asking his father, what's over there? His father responds simply, dinner. As the protagonist looks forward, eager for the hunt, he asks, then let's bring it down. His father, ever the teacher, counters, how do you plan to shoot something you can't even see? The protagonist is confused, but listens as his father instructs him to close his eyes and feel the surroundings. The protagonist, though unsure, complies and shuts his eyes, trying to sense the air around him. In the quiet stillness, he can only feel his father's presence, a strong and overwhelming force. His father's voice brings him back to focus. Now, project a single stream of your energy, just a single strand, slowly and deliberately, like the finest thread. The protagonist tries to follow the instructions, imagining his body as a spool of thread. Slowly, He releases his energy, sending it through the air, extending out into the forest. After a moment, he reports, "I can feel it." His father asks, "What do you think it is?" The protagonist, sensing a large presence, guesses, "I believe it's a tree." His father, impressed, replies, "Good. Now, scan the area again. Take it slow." As the protagonist continues, his energy finds the true target, a wild boar. He suddenly opens his eyes, uncertainty in his voice as he exclaims, "A wild boar? Or is it a bear?" He hesitates, unsure, describing the bristly fur and elongated body. His father, glancing at him, says, "It is indeed a boar." His father's expression remains unreadable as he notes, "Even I failed to discern an animal at this range when I first started." The protagonist, now more determined, teases, "I must be the fruit of your loin after all." It's a son's duty to surpass his father. That evening, as the boar sizzles over the crackling fire, the protagonist's father asks, "When did you learn to butcher, boy?" The protagonist answers, "I picked it up from a book." His father raises an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "Seems pretty practiced for someone who learned it from a book." The protagonist, feeling a sense of pride, responds, "I'm glad it looked that way." Inside, he recalls how he must have hunted hundreds of wild boars before his regression, but he keeps that to himself. As they sit, eating and talking, the father questions whether the protagonist's wish to join him on this hunt was a mere ploy to gain favor in the succession battle. The protagonist reassures him, "No, father, I know you don't care about that. I can become the heir without it, without your help." His father, ever sharp, challenges him. "That's a bold statement. Why did you really want to come out on this hunt with me?" The protagonist is honest. "Reason one, I wanted to learn something, anything to get stronger, and it looks like that first part worked out." His father nods. "And what will you do with this newfound strength?" The protagonist replies, "I'm not interested in becoming the next Cheonma. You're still in your prime. I don't want to waste my youth chasing after a title. If I can just become your heir and learn the heavenly demon martial arts, I'll be more than happy." He looks to the sky, silently thinking that he needs to learn the 9 parts of infernal flames from his father, to master it. Not just reach mastery, but surpass it. After all, even his father, with his great mastery, was defeated by Mugi. He must reach divine mastery. The father interrupts his thoughts, asking, "And the second reason?" The protagonist smirks faintly. "I just wanted to spend some time with my old man." "This is our first outing, isn't it?" His father gives a slight smirk in return. "That kind of cheap sentimentality will get you killed, son." The protagonist, ever confident, replies, "I'm with the most powerful figure under the sky. This is far from cheap. Whether it's a song or a bottle of wine, the material doesn't matter as long as I'm with you." His father remains silent, but the protagonist knows he's made his point. Later, as they prepare to continue their hunt, his father tells him to hold back a tiger at the very least, a show for a hunt with the heavenly demon. The protagonist, now intrigued, asks what his father means. His father, guiding him further into the forest, instructs, "Close your eyes again." The protagonist does so, focusing on his surroundings. His father continues, "Your target is 1,000 feet to the right, much further than before, but this time, tune into the wind and let your energy ride its current." The protagonist, thinking deeply, reflects that he's never been taught to let his energy flow with the wind. It's a lesson no manual ever mentioned. His father presses, "Play it safe and slow, and all you'll gain is another pointless skill. To apply it in real combat, you must project it at full speed as far as you can reach." The protagonist, concentrating, feels the wind and the swirling energy around him. He struggles at first, but then realizes the key. It's not about straddling two forces, but letting them intertwine, flowing together. His energy surges with the wind, and as it cuts through the forest, he locates the target, an elusive tiger. He opens his eyes and shouts, "There really is a tiger out there." His father, though initially shocked, quickly regains composure and says, "Don't slack off. The more branches you can manage, the longer you'll live in this world." The protagonist absorbs this advice, silently promising to take it to heart. That night, as they sit by the campfire, enjoying a drink, the protagonist's father notices the fine wine and comments, "This wine is strong." The protagonist, though, lies, saying, "It's a bit too strong for me. all the while thinking it's far from the truth. His father chuckles. No disciple of the demon way complains about how strong the liquor is. The protagonist retorts, "So what if I can't hold my liquor? Pain is far worse than just liquid." The conversation takes a dark turn when his father asks, "Do you believe you could kill me to save your own skin?" The protagonist, his voice calm, responds, "No, father. What kind of child could kill their parents? But in his mind he adds, should the need arise, I'm more than willing to strike you down." This is the first real conversation they've had in his lifetime, and he realizes, for the first time, how valuable his father is to him. Still, he knows that survival comes first. "Father," the protagonist asks quietly, "if you had to, could you kill me?" His father's gaze hardens. "If you need to ask, then you shouldn't speak of poison so lightly." The protagonist, with a wry smile, replies, "Maybe the wine will give me the answer tonight." He takes a sip, knowing full well that this conversation is far from over. The scene shifts to the protagonist sitting in his room, meditating. His mind reflects on the progress he's made in his training, particularly what he learned from the recent hunt. "I can now disperse my energy into the wind at will," he thinks. "The branches of energy have increased too. It's hard to believe my father actually taught me how to sense my surroundings by emitting chi. It's like having an extra life. I can detect my enemies before they even get close." As he stands up, his thoughts darken. Even with all this power, my father was still defeated by Mugi, and the heavenly demon palace fell into ruins. He recalls the formidable defenses of the heavenly demon palace, fortified by the 3 seals and 6 layers of mechanical traps, as well as the elite warriors guarding it. Each of the 8 demon lords controlled a different direction, each with their own vast forces. The protagonist lists them. The demonic swordsman of the northern heavens, wielding the northern sword in the north. The demonic bladesman of the southern heavens, wielding the southern blade in the south. The iron fist of the eastern fist faction in the east. The sorcerers of the western illusion formation in the west. The faceless swordsman who wished to become the evil smiling demon in the northeast. The drunken swordsman and his wild revelers in the southeast. The poison fang who researches all sorts of poisons in the southwest. And finally, the crazy monks obsessed with the demonic Buddha who spread chaos across the lands in the southwest. The outer defenses were never breached, the protagonist reflects. One of the demon lords must have slipped Mugi into the inner chambers. He recalls how none of the demon lords stepped forward to avenge his father, choosing silence over action. "They're all traitors in my eyes," he thinks. "I know all about them, the lives they led, and how they met their end. This time, I will use them as pawns to achieve my goal." As he stands up to go outside, he suddenly hears the sound of shouting. "Hey, fatty! Has the young master still not returned from the training ground?" The protagonist's attention snaps to the commotion, and he hears his bodyguard On being bullied by a group of men. One of them, Po Yang, a disciple of the Cleaver Demon, steps forward, his voice laced with disdain. "How many days is he going to take? Go fetch him now!" The protagonist, surprised, steps forward and interrupts. "And what are you doing out here?" His bodyguard, looking relieved to see him, responds, "Master." The protagonist approaches her, addressing her sharply. "I said you were free to go about your business during my training. Have you been standing guard here the whole time?" Po Yang steps forward mocking, "What's with the sudden dedication to training?" The protagonist eyes him, recognizing him as a disciple of the Cleaver Demon. He realizes that Po Yang's behavior is a result of the recent changes after his father announced that anyone could claim the position of his successor. "The only reason he can pull stunts like this is because of my father," the protagonist thinks. "The announcement only fueled others' desire to take me down," Po Yang continues, accusing the protagonist of crippling Piaong Ho, his junior brother. "He can no longer devote himself to the martial way," Po Yang says, a clear challenge in his voice. The protagonist coolly replies, "Do you expect me to nurse him back to health?" Po Yang, angered, demands an apology, but the protagonist instead demands one in return. "Apologize for the rude words you said to my bodyguard." At first, Po Yang resists, but when the protagonist insists, he relents with a sneer. "You want me to kneel before this sack of lards," referring to On. The protagonist's voice hardens. "Watch your tongue." Po Yang, growing more enraged, refuses, shouting, "Kill me if you must, but I'll never kneel to her." The protagonist, his patience gone, unsheathes his sword. "Kneel and apologize, or fight me. The choice is yours," he declares. "By the way, your master won't approve of you backing away from this fight." Po Yang, defiant, challenges the protagonist. "Why are you going so far for her?" The protagonist responds coldly. "You're all free to come and find me, but you will not disrespect my people." He glances at his bodyguard, who stands by, flustered, knowing that this situation is beyond her control. Po Yang, now completely enraged, draws his sword. But before he can make a move, his comrades hesitate. The bodyguard tries to intervene, but the tension is too thick. Po Yang strikes, aiming for the protagonist's neck. But with a swift dodge, the protagonist closes the distance and strikes through Po Yang's mouth, the blade piercing his head and killing him instantly. "Your reckless tongue has sealed your fate," the protagonist says coldly. The group stands in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what just happened. The bodyguard watches, equally shocked, as Po Yang's body drops to the ground, blood pouring from his mouth. The protagonist stands, sword still in hand, his gaze unwavering. The lesson is clear. Disrespect will not be tolerated, and anyone who dares to challenge him or his people will face the consequences. As the group retreats with Po Yang's body, the protagonist speaks to An, asking why she is so concerned about him. She responds, "I'm not worth half the trouble." The protagonist smiles faintly, thinking, "You're more worried about me than your own feelings." He answers her, "I didn't do it for you. I merely struck down those who deserved it." An, still concerned, warns him, "The Cleaver Demon will not let this slide." The protagonist nods, acknowledging her concern. "The 8 demon lords are undisputed masters of the demon cult," he thinks. "Each one is backed by a faction my father could not ignore. The Cleaver Demon is one of them. I crippled one of his disciples and killed another. He has every reason to retaliate." But the protagonist remains calm, saying, "But you have to let this pass. The man stands to gain nothing by reacting. What good would it do for him to get involved?" An presses further, "But you wounded his pride, sir." The protagonist shrugs. The Cleaver Demon isn't the type to waste his time on pride. He's not that kind of man. He places a hand on An's shoulder, reassuring her, "In any case, you have nothing to worry about." As An watches him, she remains flustered, but the protagonist is already thinking ahead. "Eliminating Po Yang works to my advantage. With his death, all eyes will be on me. If there was any chance of becoming my father's successor, this could score me some points." Later, the protagonist reflects on the events as he sits outside, looking up at the sky. "Looking back, I was stuck in a deep sense of defeat after my family fell apart. It felt like my will to live would be extinguished unless I relentlessly pursued my goal. I wonder what would have become of me had I not discovered the way to return to the past." Suddenly, a sharp presence interrupts his thoughts. He flinches as a blade descends toward him, only to see the Cleaver Demon standing behind him, about to strike. The protagonist knows he cannot dodge at this distance, no matter how much knowledge he has from the past. He prepares himself for the worst. But instead of striking, the Cleaver Demon lowers his blade and sits next to him, grinning. "Why'd you do it, kid?" the Cleaver Demon asks, poking him with the blade's handle. The protagonist, tense but calm, replies, "He was acting out of line, sir." The Cleaver Demon raises the blade again, this time pointing it toward the protagonist's neck. "How about I bring your cherished little head to your father and see what he thinks about that?" The protagonist, unfazed, replies, "I doubt my head would be welcome in his eyes, even if I am his son." The Cleaver Demon, sensing his defiance, grins and strikes the ground with his blade. "This little slit is a measly symbol of your father's favor," he says. "And for the rest of the ratio, well, that's me." The protagonist, determined, responds with a confident grin. "I'm a son after all. Surely I'm good for this much." The Cleaver Demon smiles, intrigued. "Well, there's only one way to test this theory. If I were to take your head right now, do you think your father would kill me or spare me?" The protagonist replies, "You're grossly underestimating his parental affection." The Cleaver Demon, amused, releases energy, shocking the protagonist. "Maybe there's no need. He has 2 sons to choose from, but only one of you in this world." The Cleaver Demon laughs. "Seems you're not as dense as my disciple." The protagonist, still composed, says, "If he were anything like you, he'd still be alive. The Cleaver Demon, now showing a rare smile, says, "For as long as I can remember, misfortune has followed me around like a shadow. It's best you don't run into me too often." The protagonist nods. "I'll be sure to remember that." As the Cleaver Demon leaves, the protagonist feels a sharp pain in his side, remembering how the demon had poked him earlier. He's reckless, but always calculating, the protagonist thinks. The fact that he repeated the threat to take my head means he was considering it seriously. Tonight, he came to test me, to see if I'm worthy of becoming my father's successor. It looks like the Cleaver Demon is shaping up to be my first true adversary. The scene begins with the protagonist meditating in his room when he senses something. He goes up to the roof and finds his father standing there. His father looks at him and says, "I heard you killed one of Cheompa's disciples." The protagonist responds, "That bastard deserved it." His father, unfazed, replies, "The way is of little interest to me. Cheompa came to find me about it." The protagonist is surprised. "Are you saying the Cleaver Demon came to demand my punishment just because his disciple died?" His father confirms, "Indeed, I was caught off guard myself. I know him to be one who wouldn't go out of his way for such a thing." The protagonist remains quiet but reflects on the situation. The Cleaver Demon is testing my relationship with my father, trying to gauge whether my father sees me as his heir, and what punishment he might impose. His father then says, "You asked me once which of the demons I trusted the most. Well, I trust no one, not even the 8 who serve me." The protagonist is shocked by this admission. His father continues, "You also mentioned we need to re-establish discipline within the cult. Enough with the nonsense about rooting out corruption. Now, tell me what you really think." The protagonist, firm in his beliefs, replies, "At some point, we lost our way." His father is taken aback, asking, "Lost our way?" The protagonist presses on, "Yes, sir. The core belief of our cult, the Demon Way, is to hunt down and destroy absolutely evil wherever it arises." His father, surprised, asks, "The cult's core belief is to hunt down absolutely evil?" The protagonist responds, "Yes. I don't believe our true enemies are the Orthodox sect. Our true enemy is absolute evil itself. There's evil out there so wild, so cowardly, so twisted, that even devils would spit in disgust." He goes on, "The Orthodox path may handle lesser evil, but against true evil, they are helpless. The ones who stand in the light, believing in forgiveness, are doomed to fail against such darkness. The true demon way must be about confronting that evil, placing our hands deep in the filth if we have to. Only then can we truly call ourselves demons. If we don't set our path straight, we won't last long." His father, quiet for a moment, says nothing, but the protagonist reflects, "These aren't ideas I learned from our cult. I came to realize them after living my life." His father breaks the silence, asking, "Do you have any more arrogant insights you want to share?" The protagonist replies, "No, not today." His father then says, "I think I understand why Cheompa asked me to punish you. He must sense something in you and is testing me through you." The protagonist replies, "Perhaps he sees your potential to be my successor." His father responds, "Or maybe he thinks you're a loose cannon who could bring the cult to ruin." His father then motions for him to follow. The scene shifts as they approach a massive stone door, the testing ground for Cheonma disciples. The protagonist reflects, "This place is the proving ground for Cheonma disciples, where they must prove their worth as the next heavenly demon. Only those who succeed make it out alive. It's a place so dangerous that even my ambitious brother never dared to enter." He then looks toward his father and says, "You can't expect me to go in there, right?" His father answers, "I stepped into the halls when I was your age." The protagonist, shocked, asks, "How long did it take you to come out?" His father replies, 2 months. The protagonist, wide-eyed, says, 2 months? You're considered one of the most talented Cheonma in history. And it took you 2 months? His father explains, "The average time is 3 years. The protagonist, stunned, responds, "And you want me to go in without any prep work?" His father, sternly, says, "I meant what I said earlier. I have to punish you." The protagonist, thinking deeply, asks, "Are you seriously sending me into a place where I could die just because the old man asked you to punish me? Do you really not care if you lose your son? Or are you hoping I'll be much stronger than I am now?" The protagonist, with a slight smirk, responds, "All right, I'll do it. I'll make sure to beat your time in the halls." His father smiles and replies, Let's try not dying first. With newfound resolve, the protagonist prepares himself for the challenge ahead. The protagonist enters the testing hall, reflecting on what makes this place so deadly. He approaches a tablet with the rules for the trial. 1. Cut down all enemies without infusing your sword with chi or using blade blast. 2. If you fail within the time, you may attempt it again after 10 days. 3. When ready, stand in the red circle. The protagonist considers the challenge and decides to go ahead, thinking, I guess they want me to eat these grain pills for the duration of the trial if I fail now. No point in waiting. Standing in the red circle, mannequins emerge from the ground, each marked with red symbols. Looks like I need to cut these areas precisely, the protagonist thinks. He begins slashing, cutting through each mannequin one by one with pinpoint accuracy. Easier than I thought, he muses. But then a mannequin starts to fall to the ground. Panicking, he quickly moves to stop it from descending, barely making the cut in time. 3 more mannequins begin to fall, and he leaps forward, slashing each one in quick succession. He finishes with one final mannequin, cutting it precisely as it almost hits the ground. That was close, he thinks. If I were still at my previous skill level, clearing the first row would have been impossible. As the room opens to the next trial, the protagonist notices a tablet with comments from previous participants. One says, "Finally made it after 37 attempts." Another comments, "I tried to go back, but the way was sealed." The protagonist reads on and is surprised to see his father's handwriting. "Idiots, all of you." He smirks, thinking, I guess that's something special, but calling them idiots is a bit harsh. Entering the next room filled with various weapons, the protagonist reads the tablet. 1. Cut the stone. 2. You have 2 hours to use the sword on the wall. You are permitted to channel your chi or use blade blast. 3. If you fail within the time, you may attempt it again after 20 days. 4. When ready, stand in the red circle. He's surprised by the 2-hour time limit. 2 hours to cut 1 iron ball? I could go through 100 of them with blade blast, he thinks. He tries hitting the ball with his sword, but it breaks. Yep, that confirms it, he thinks. I'll just use blade blast and move on. But then he stops himself. Think again, that would be too easy. What did the others do? He reads more comments from previous participants, many claiming it was impossible, and some used blade blast. His father's message reads, "Baffling buffoons, lose your cool, lose your edge." The protagonist thinks, why did he add the extra line? I'm sure that was meant to be a biting insult. The rules say he's permitted to use chi or blade blast, but not that he must use them. His father's message warns against using blade blast, since the blade would heat up when chi is expelled. The protagonist starts trying different weapons on the ball, one by one, but none of them work. Frustrated, he contemplates using blade blast, but remembers his father's warning. Suddenly, he focuses and tries a different approach. He uses his ability to release energy, feeling the grooves in the steel ball that he couldn't see with his eyes. He prepares his sword, noticing a fine groove that forms a perfect circle around the ball. With a precise slice, he cuts the ball in half. Excited, he shouts, "I did it!" But as the ball splits, he sees something inside, a demon essence pill. The protagonist stares at the demon essence pill inside the split ball. He knows that using blade blast would have incinerated it, but the fact that he cut the ball without relying on his energy means the pill is a special reward for those who succeed in the trial without outside help. This will give me a significant boost to my chi, he thinks. His father's words echo in his mind. Lose your cool, lose your edge. Smiling, he murmurs, "Thank you, Father." After swallowing the pill, he meditates. The purple mist surrounding him signals the growth of his abilities. His chi strengthens, and he clenches his fists, feeling the newfound power surging through his body. Unlike before, I can feel the powerful energy flowing through my veins, he thinks. Mastery of chi was my weakest area, but this boost has made up for it. Entering the next trial, the protagonist reads the tablet. 1. Distinguish between life and death. 2. If you fail, you may attempt it again after 5 days. 3. When ready, stand in the red circle. Confused, he steps into the red circle and watches as a pillar appears with a bunch of herbs on top. I get it. They want me to separate the medicinal herbs from the poisonous ones, he thinks. Having studied herbs before, especially for the old man Ryongja, he easily identifies the correct herb, picking it up. The tablet disappears, but then, to his surprise, it reappears. Looks like I have to get it right twice, he realizes, his mind working. It's a countermeasure to prevent passing by luck. He carefully picks another herb, and the column vanishes again. Not coming back up. What was that about? He wonders as the next trial door opens. Checking the tablet, he reads comments from past participants who struggled, some of whom consumed the wrong herbs and were poisoned. One comment, in particular, stands out. His father's message? Don't trust luck. Trust your wits. The protagonist smirks, thinking, I'm pretty sure Dad memorized every poisonous herb before even trying. At least I managed to keep my head, old man. As he approaches the final trial, he sees another tablet that reads, 1. Survive the illusionary circle of life and death. 2. Death in the circle means death in reality. 3. When ready, stand in the red circle. The protagonist, mentally preparing, thinks, a trial where you die if you fail? Brutal. If I ever become the heavenly demon, I'm going to hunt down the bastard who created this test. He reads the comments of those who attempted the trial. I've never been more terrified in my life. Even if someone points a knife to my door, I'm never stepping foot in that circle. Then he reads his father's comment, never stop moving. The protagonist thinks, never stop moving? He left a clue, but it sounds more like advice for life ahead. He steps into the red circle, and, as the surroundings shift, he finds himself in a new environment. The wind feels real, and everything seems lifelike. He can't help but think, there was a formation testing like this, but this feels different. Suddenly he's surrounded by zombie-like creatures, each one looking like a phantom, but exuding real murderous intent. Well, talk about striking gold, he mutters, drawing his sword. With precision, he slashes through the monsters, cutting them down with ease. Since my opponents aren't human, I can cut them down without hesitation, he thinks, slicing through them one by one. As more monsters approach, he takes them down in rapid succession, his new chi abilities allowing him to wield his sword with greater ease. Thanks to the demon essence, I can wield my chi with greater ease, he thinks, wiping his blade. After slaying the final group of monsters, he looks around. Was that it? He wonders. It'd be a bit of a letdown if it is. But just as he questions, more monstrous figures appear. Of course not, he smirks. But this wave sure feels a whole lot stronger than the first. As the battle continues, the protagonist moves fluidly, slicing through one zombie-like monster after another. The enemies are growing stronger with each wave, he thinks. But now, I finally understand what my father meant by never stop moving. He dodges attacks and cuts down his opponents with precision, feeling the knowledge he carried over from his past life, sinking with his body. This is the best real battle since my regression, he thinks. No chance to rest, but I'm improving with every swing. As the monsters keep coming, he grins. Come at me even faster, even stronger. With each kill, he feels himself growing stronger. Finally, after a wave of attacks, he defeats the last monster, slashing it cleanly. Is it over? He wonders, looking around. As the illusion fades, the tablet reappears. Congratulations on successfully passing the trial. Ascendant, may you use your power to strengthen and restore the great legacy of the heavenly demon cult. The protagonist smiles, reading the message. I passed the trial that took my father 2 months to complete. I did it in 1 day. But if word of this spreads, there'll be rumors all over the cult. This kind of speed will raise suspicion, not praise. Guess I'll stick around and train a while longer. Drill everything into me to make them truly mine. The scene shifts exactly 100 days later. The protagonist approaches his father, who asks, "Did you manage to slice the iron ball correctly?" The protagonist replies confidently, "With all the clues you left, I nailed it. Didn't take a break during the last trial." His father smiles faintly, and the protagonist wonders, did he just smile a little? Or am I imagining things? His father responds, "You're sharper than I gave you credit for." The protagonist smiles back, "Of course, I'm your son." His father sighs, and the protagonist reflects, "Before I came back, I used to think he enjoyed watching his juniors fight each other for the right to succeed him. But now, I get it. He's willing to endure the death of his own child if it means ensuring the future of the cult. He doesn't actually enjoy the strife itself." At that moment, someone else enters, Chief Strategist Myong. "Passing the trials in 100 days is no small achievement, young master," he says. The protagonist acknowledges him. "It's been a while, Chief Strategist." Myong, with a serious expression, replies, "Perfect timing. I was hoping to discuss a cult matter with you." The protagonist's mind races. The Chief Strategist wants to discuss something important. This can't be good. Myong explains, "We've received an anonymous letter claiming corruption within the Demon God faction." The protagonist is shocked. The Demon God faction? Their leader is the younger brother of Cheonpa-gu's, the Cleaver Demon. "Looks like I'll have to cross paths with him again." Myong continues, "We tried to investigate last year, but our special investigator was killed by the Demon Guard. They took their own life soon after." The protagonist remains silent, considering the danger. Myong asks, "I want you to step in as the special investigator and handle this." The protagonist hesitates, thinking, being found guilty of corruption means execution. Whoever is behind this will cover their tracks, and they won't be easy on the investigator just because he's the son of the Cheonma. Myong responds, "I won't deny it. You'll be putting your life on the line for this mission." The protagonist glances at his father, thinking, this is another test from him. His father speaks, "I recall you saying we must wipe out corruption and protect the cult." The protagonist replies, "Well, that's after I become the heavenly demon." His father then responds, "Ah, so you're too scared to do it now?" His father's words sting, but the protagonist answers, "If you put it that way, I have no choice but to accept." The protagonist, with resolve, says, "I'll get it done." As they share a brief look, he thinks, "I don't know what you're planning, old man, but I'll put on a good show for you." He then adds, "One more thing. This could be the last time we see each other. How about we share a drink later, father?" But before he can finish, his father leaves the room, leaving him with mixed emotions. All gruff and tough, but deep down, he's a softie, he mutters to himself. Chief Strategist Myong watches the interaction, saying, "Doesn't seem that way to me." The scene shifts to the next day, where the protagonist is greeted by an investigator named Daryong. The protagonist asks, "Why are you here, Daryong?" "The reason I'm asking is because I asked the Chief Strategist to send me the finest beauty from Hwangcheon." Daryong replies, joking in a deadpan manner, "I'm the most beautiful in his eyes, sir." The protagonist sighs and then asks, "What kind of man is the commander of the Demon God faction?" Daryong explains, "Commander Cheonyang-gu is Cheonpa-gu's younger brother. He's been heading the faction for 8 winters, handling all sorts of risky missions, and leading an elite force." The protagonist listens intently. "Sounds like he's good at his job," he comments. Daryong looks at the protagonist with a flat expression, saying, "Even if I expose all their dirty laundry, nothing will change." The protagonist, now understanding, asks, "Aren't you scared?" Daryong replies, "Not at all." The protagonist then recalls the murder of the previous investigator. "The last investigator was killed in cold blood," he says. Daryong responds, "That investigator was my direct senior, sir. He was my mentor." The protagonist, understanding the weight of the situation, finally sees the reason for Daryong's cold demeanor. "Now I get it," he thinks, realizing just how personal this mission is for Daryong. The scene opens at the Demon Dragon Palace, where the investigator, Daryong, approaches the guards. "Where do you hail from?" one guard asks. Daryong confidently responds, "From the Hwangcheon office. We have business with the Lord Commander, so step aside." The guard smirks. "Special investigator, huh? You don't look so special to me, little man." Another guard adds, "You're not getting in without approval from the higher-ups." Daryong pulls out a document, showing his right to enter. "Fine, put that away before you give someone a paper cut. I'll need to report this in." One guard responds, but Daryong insists, "No need, we'll be seeing your boss ourselves." The guards argue with Daryong, calling him a crook and refusing to let him pass. The protagonist, observing the interaction, steps in, his voice calm but commanding. "Just one question for you. Do you know who I am?" The guards falter, then say, "Yes, of course, sir." The protagonist smiles. "Oh, that's interesting," he says, before smacking the guards in the groin, causing one to double over in pain. He turns to Daryong. "So, are you going to show me the way or what?" The flustered investigator nods, and they proceed through the palace. As they enter a crowded area, Daryong shouts, "Are you all blind? You're obstructing an official investigation. Do you want to rot in jail?" One of the men from the crowd shouts, "Who the hell is causing trouble on our turf?" Daryong demands the man's name and rank. The man, Dango, identifies himself as the captain of the 1st Division of the Demon Guard. "I'm at the top of the pecking order among the captains, known for my ruthlessness," he boasts. The main protagonist, unfazed, steps forward. "Good to see you again, Captain Go," he says, approaching the captain with a confident smirk. "When did we last meet? Must have been at the latest banquet." Captain Go seems startled but extends his hand, and the protagonist grips it tightly, causing the captain to wince in shock. "I'm in a bit of a rush to gain an audience with the Lord Commander. Kindly step aside, Captain," the protagonist says quietly. "Test me, and you'll never hold a sword again with this hand." Captain Go replies faintly, "Funny how some folks think a title or noble blood makes you immune from a quick shiv to the gut." The protagonist responds, "I'm curious to see if you can even manage to hold a dagger when I'm done." Captain Go retorts, "We'll just see about that, young master, whether it be my blade or your guts that will hit the ground first." The protagonist doesn't flinch. After a tense moment, the captain steps aside reluctantly. "Thank you for your cooperation, Captain. I owe you a drink sometime," the protagonist says, walking past him. Daryong, still processing, asks, "Do you know Captain Go, young master?" The protagonist shrugs. "No, never met the brute before today." Daryong asks, "How did you—" The protagonist grins. "I gave his hand a little readjustment. He'll be eating with his left hand for a while." Daryong is stunned as they continue toward the Lord Commander's office. Upon reaching the office, the guards block the door, stating, "You can't see him without an appointment." The protagonist sighs. "Don't you people ever get tired of this routine?" He pulls out the document again, saying, "By denying me entry, you are effectively disrespecting my father, the supreme commander of the cult." The guards hesitate before allowing them to enter. Inside, they meet Lord Cheonyang-gu, the commander of the demon god faction. He greets them with a slight grin, apologizing for his men's rude behavior. The protagonist notes the strong chi radiating from the Lord's physique, impressed by his strength. "I see," the protagonist comments. "Seems like your men have too much time on their hands. Maybe you should have them crack a book once in a while, sir." Lord Cheonyang chuckles. "They say ignorance breeds courage, don't they?" The protagonist responds, "In all these times, the bold ones have grown better at plotting schemes." Lord Cheonyang, smiling knowingly, replies, "I guess I'm getting old and out of touch with the times." The protagonist continues, "Seems like my father sent me here to punish me." The Lord reacts, "I see. So why did the Huangqian office launch this investigation? Was it another anonymous tip like last time?" Daryong answers, "We can't disclose that information." The protagonist cuts him off, saying, "That's right. A tip came in." Lord Cheonyang sighs. Dealing with an army of misfits like the demon god faction comes with its headaches. It's exhausting. The protagonist responds, "I'd like to wrap up the investigation as soon as possible. Please bear with me, even if it's inconvenient." Lord Cheonyang laughs. "Inconvenient? You wound me. I'm not that sort of man." The protagonist continues, "Everyone knows the Cleaver Demon supports my elder brother, sir." Cheonyang nods. "Sure, that's true, but I've always considered you the rightful heir. I'll make sure to support you." The protagonist smirks. "I find comfort in your words, sir." Lord Cheonyang offers, "I'll have accommodations arranged for you. Be careful, though. I'm just looking out for you." The protagonist raises an eyebrow. "Are you afraid I'll end up dead like my predecessors?" Cheonyang responds nonchalantly, "Oh, please, nothing like that. Surely the Supreme Commander didn't send you here to die in cold blood. I'll keep both eyes on this when I can." The protagonist nods. "That's good to know, my lord. I'll take my leave then." As they leave, the protagonist thinks, "I can't help but feel that my father's true intention in sending me here was to make a statement. Cheonyang should be prepared." The scene shifts back to the Cheonma and the chief strategist. "This isn't something we must take lightly, my lord," the chief strategist says. "I should have handled this myself instead of sending your son in my stead." The protagonist's father replies, "The boy said to me earlier that we have strayed from our path." The chief strategist, shocked, responds, "Is that why you threw him into the lion's den?" The father replies, "If he's going to talk the talk, he better be ready to walk the walk." The chief strategist is taken aback by this bold approach.
This video isn't free. It'll cost you just one subscribe, and I'm just gonna flip this around and ask you a couple of questions. You know we appreciate tips in the form of likes and comments if you feel like it.